Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Today we group 5 will present about lab 6, which is entitled Spinal Reflexes and Reactions in Humans. The objectives of these experiments are to differentiate the differences between swallowing reflex during rapid and slow succession. Second, to observe the time lapse between the experimenter and observer reaction time to sight. Last is to observe the time lapse between the experimenter and observer reaction time to touch. A reflex is an involuntary and predictable response to the stimulus. These discrete neural pathways which connect through the central nervous system, which is the brain and spinal cord, are involved in the performance of a reflex act. Such nervous pathways are called reflex arcs. Most reflexes involve the brain, but some use only the spinal cord. It is the negative feedback circuit that is comprised of three main components, which are first, the afferent neuron, second, the interneuron, and last but not least is the afferent portion or motor neuron.
So we begin with experiment 1, which is a swallowing reflex. First is the material, which is a glass of water. Next is the procedure. Firstly is swallow the saliva in your mouth cavity and immediately afterward try to swallow again. Second is drink a glass of water and repeat procedure 1. The result of the experiment is without drinking water, difficult to swallow saliva. When drinking water, easy to swallow saliva. Discussion. From this experiment, we can see without drinking water, we difficult to swallow saliva for second time. It is because no more saliva, there's no more stimulant. Next, when drinking water, we easily to swallow saliva for second time. It is because the water acts as a stimulus to replace saliva in our mouth cavity to stimulate the muscle of the esophagus to swallow. This experiment do not have error if because the result was accurate and simple experiment. Did you know? First, when it is difficult to swallow our saliva in rapid succession, it is swallowing a completely rotary section. This is because the saliva will act as stimuli in the mouth cavity. When the saliva had swallowed at the first time, there is no more saliva. There's no more stimuli. As a result, we must wait until our saliva gland produce enough saliva to act as stimuli in order for the swallowing reflex to occur. No, swallowing is a voluntary action. Second, explain the ability to swallow in rapid succession when drinking water compared to just swallowing saliva in your mouth cavity. When drinking water, we feel easy to swallow the saliva than just swallowing saliva in mouth cavity. It is because the water acts as stimulus to replace saliva in our mouth cavity to stimulate the muscle of esophagus to swallow. So we begin with experiment 1, which is a swallowing reflex. First is the material, which is a glass of water. Next is the procedure. Firstly is swallow the saliva in your mouth cavity and immediately afterward try to swallow again. Second is drink a glass of water and repeat procedure 1. The result of the experiment is without drinking water, difficult to swallow saliva. When drinking water, easy to swallow saliva. Discussion. From this experiment, we can see without drinking water, we difficult to swallow saliva for second time. It is because no more saliva, there's no more stimulant. Next, when drinking water, we easily to swallow saliva for second time. It is because the water acts as a stimulus to replace saliva in our mouth cavity to stimulate the muscle of the esophagus to swallow. This experiment do not have error if because the result was accurate and simple experiment. Did you know? First, when It is difficult to swallow our saliva in repeat sensation. It is shadowing a competing retrosation. This is because the saliva will act as stimuli in the mouth cavity. When the saliva had swallowed at the first time, there is no more saliva. There's no more stimuli. As a result, we must wait until our saliva gland produce enough saliva to act as stimuli in order for the swallowing reflex to occur. No, swallowing is involuntary action. Second, explain the ability to swallow in rapid sensation when drinking water compared to just swallowing saliva in your mouth cavity. When drinking water, we feel easy to swallow the saliva than just swallowing saliva in mouth cavity. It is because the water acts as stimulus to replace saliva in our mouth cavity to stimulate the muscle of esophagus to swallow.
Experiment is reaction time to sight. Objective is to measure the reaction time that can give us some indication of the speed at which impulses are transmitted in the nervous system. Some quick briefing about our experiment. We will test our fast reflexes by using stopwatch. Stopwatch is our only equipment. Procedures are both experimenter and subject should have a stopwatch each and start both stopwatch simultaneously. Second, the experimenter stop his or her stopwatch as soon as the subject sees this. The subject then stop his or her stopwatch too. Next, measure the time lapse between both experimenter and subject's action, which will give reaction time of the subject and record in table 6.1. Lastly, repeat 10 times and calculate the average reaction time.
Okay.
Start. Stop. For discussion, our brain fastly reacts to stimuli. The subject's time lapse with the experimenter only 0 to 1 seconds only. Based on the video, we can see that the subjects react slower than the experimenter. This may be due to the subject's brain react to stimuli slow, or maybe due to the subject getting distracted. The average subject's time is 2.97, but sometimes the subject reacts faster than the experimenter. To avoid this problem to occur again, subjects should follow these precautions. First, subjects should focus on the experimenter's hands movement. Question: is there any evidence that the subject improved with practice? Yes. The subject's timer reaction decreases as the trials increases. This shown that the subject's brain reacts more faster at reacting to stimuli than before. For conclusion, our brain reacts fast towards stimuli and will react more faster than before as the trial increases.
For experiment 6.3, we're going to be doing experiment on reaction time to touch. The materials involved are 2 stopwatch, thread and measuring tape. Both experimenter and subject should have a stopwatch and start both watches simultaneously, and the subject should close his eyes. Second, the experimenter should press her stopwatch to stop and simultaneously thread the subject's foot. The third one, the subject then press his stopwatch to stop when she feels the pain, and the fourth one will repeat 10 times and calculate and record the average reaction. From this result, I calculated that the average reaction is 0.146 seconds. As you can see here, the length of nerve pathway between the receptor and to the effector of our subject is 2.33 meter, and after we calculate it, the speed of impulse transmission is 15.96 meter per second.
From the experiment, it can be said that the reaction to touch is spinal reflex. This is because reaction to touch that we investigate is reaction of the subject to sharp pain being hit on her leg. Spinal reflex control means that body is responding immediately without conscious thinking or planning, as the reaction is automatic and rapid. In spinal reflex R, the nerve impulse passes through the spinal cord, does not involve brain. Spinal reflex usually prevent us from dangerous situations that need fast responses such as touching hot objects. These are the questions that have been asked in our lab manual. So the first one is the subject's reaction time longer in experiment 6.3 compared to experiment 6.2? If so, why? Yes, the subject's reaction time is longer in experiment 6.3 compared to experiment 6.2 because length of the nerve pathway for the experiment 6.2 is shorter compared to nerve pathway of experiment 6.3. The second one is which of the reflex that have you investigated are spinal reflex and which are cerebral? Reaction to sight is cerebral reflex because the nerve impulse passes through the brain, and reaction to touch is spinal reflex because nerve impulse passes through spinal cord and it does not involve brain. And the third one is what other reflexes are shown by human and what parts of the CNS are involved in each case. Here we've given knee jerk, which is spinal, reaction to touching hard objects, spinal, pupil reflex, cerebral, and sneezing, cerebral.
In conclusion, all three of the objectives for these experiments are successfully achieved. For experiment 6.1, there was no experimental error since it is a simple and accurate experiment. Experiment 6.2 has experimental error because subject's brain take longer time to react to stimuli.